Do you think in our endeavor to be global citizens, have we lost in touch with that abundant wealth of literature, the stories that bind us together? And hence do we see a surfeit of late of retelling those old forgotten tales in the newer lingo by newer authors who are speaking the new language, new grammar?
Yes, thank you for initiating the conversation, Anupama. Yes, you're very right. You know, the arrogance of the past is that there's of the present is that there's a apathy towards the past and what makes our mythology, our history, or what has gone into our scriptures. But there's a very valid reason why children have not read our scriptures. If you open, when I was doing the research for this book, the Daivya Sutras, so I was reading upon the 18 Mahapuranas, I found that the stories are very fascinating, charming stories, and the same kind of stories that you have in the Harry Potter or any other, magical series out there. But why aren't children reading what is available in India? The reason being this, that maybe for quite some time the stories were not written in such an interesting way that we could get our children interested. It's not as if children don't read. When you go to England and a day before the Harry Potter, the latest Harry Potter book is to be released, you see these serpentine queues going right from Trafalgar Square up to the Oxford Square. So it's not as if children are not reading, they are reading what they want to read. So as an author, we are hefting a huge responsibility on our shoulders that we give them what interests them in a language that interests them. Hence, these stories needed to be rewritten in a simpler language, and not they shouldn't have a very didactic or a very preachy takeaway. So it is for the children to decide, what they want to learn from the story. We are nobody to tell them that you should do this, you should not do this. So as she was talking that she is reading up on the story of Mahashivratri, that it's not as if you need to go through all those rituals. Even if you are doing those things inadvertently, they count. So good deeds count. So you just tell them they count. You can't tell them that you must do them. Hence, I felt that a rewriting of all these stories was very much required without a didactic or a preachy takeaway. That was my stance.
Wonderfully said. Wonderful.
And coming to you, because this book came well before mine, and Kings, Saviours and Scoundrels. So across the board, you are talking about 3 different characterizations. How come you thought about writing this book, considering that we've immensely enjoyed Padma Bani Pola and Masala Mix, which were books completely from a different genre, and then to switch the genres, and once you transcend, and then you come up with something which is so brilliant in a completely different vertical. How did you manage this magic?
Do you want an author-like answer or the brutal frank answer?
Absolutely. I want a co-author's and a friend's answer. So that's the honest one.
See, when you sit on a dais like this, everything sounds very romantic and very nice. But only an author knows, the tears that we shed, the toil that goes in. So my first book was received very well. It was the genesis was just a 300-word story, from which enough back layers were built. So I had the core of an onion and I built the onion. So I was so happy with the success. I took it upon myself to do the sequel to it, and I felt the sequel came out better than the original. But we have as people say, we think something and God decides something else. We had a once-in-a-lifetime experience of the pandemic, and books sales saw a huge nosedive. So the sequel, to put it in a very polite manner, went into cold storage. And we were all hanging there. Okay, so then I participated in a whole lot of anthologies, which was nice, which kept the creative juices going. But there were no titles that were coming across my name. So I got tired of how many times can you warm the benches of fellow authors' launches. So Deepankar, one fine day, it was a launch of somebody from Gurgaon, not from the Radio Mania family, but somebody. So I met him there. So all of a sudden over a coffee he pops up, Harshali, you were there, I think. He said, why don't you retell Kathasarit Sagara? I said, huh? So I've been mentoring kids, young adults I would call them, for years now. That's how I, earn my, for lack of better word, peanut butter and cheese slices rather than bread and butter. So I said, you seriously? He said, yeah. Then that's the first time I went and read about this. This is a very complex story structure because it is considered India's oldest classic, and it has a very, very complex story structure. More than 7 lakh verses were written in the original story. I won't go into the Genesis because the Genesis story itself is so fantastic. It's very, very arresting. So you would like to delve more into it. So I said, okay, and I am one, you throw a challenge at me without thinking left, right, center. I dived deep into it and said, yes. I had no clue what I was heading into. Then I read about 1.5 lakhs of archaic words in less than 20 days. What helped me here was I used to teach original Shakespeare. So you had some idea what was happening. Then I took a chart paper and drew like my first novel, I drew the flow chart. Then I understood what was happening. So then 20 days later, I sent him 3 stories. And he read the first story and he said, this is good to go to print. And that was just taken out of a small paragraph. It was a 4-line paragraph in the original story. So I built up enough characters and made it. So I said, if you can produce the rest like this, I'll do it. So we went ahead, I went on writing, I wrote about 45 stories. She said, why are you writing so many? We are not going to put so many. So we culled a few which appeal to, which were spread across genres and which appeal to a wider audience. Then around Diwali time, he said, why don't you do the illustrations as well? So my house was packed with the painters and I sat down on the floor while I told them, take care of that patch there, and I kept, scribbling on paper. So there's a lot of stories behind it, and that's how it came up. The basic crux of the story is just to stay relevant, so that you can come to places like this, talk about your book. That's the driving force more so.
And there are these wonderful illustrations. You just spoke about those. How did the idea of illustrations come to you? I mean, even I have them in my book. And could you also show what you have done for our readers out there?
Thank you.
And why did the idea come up?
I think, they're very, they're done in black ink on a white paper. And, he thought maybe I can make them story-centric. Rather than we take the services of an illustrator who may not understand what illustration you want. His diagrams or his work would be very generic, whereas I would look at something and do. So I did again about 40, out of which only 27 were picked. That too after hell of a lot of dissing at how my lines are not doing the job that they're supposed to do. Lines as in the lines of the illustration, nothing else. But then I had to tell him, look, this is short notice and this is not my area of expertise, but I'm trying. So it was trying, but we managed.
Yes, Anupama, I guess at the professional level and the in this literature circle, we both share the affections of the same man. That is Dipankar Mukherjee, who really deserves a mention over here. Because even for me, Dipankar came up with the idea of writing stories from the Mahapuranas, because he really has a penchant, he has an incline for those stories. So I told him, at the same time that Puranas, are you kidding me? I mean, who writes about Smritis and Shrutis? Because it is very difficult to pick up the write stuff from there, considering there are so many dichotomies. I mean, even you must have come across so many dichotomies in terms of names, in terms of narration, in terms of places at times. So he said, no, give this a try. And after much argument, and sometimes even the conversation was like, you don't love me anymore, kinds of, that's why you want me to delve into something which you know I'm bound to fail at. So he said, no, I really love you, you're my author, but please try for once. And that is how, even my daughter came into the thing, because I wanted to pass everything through a different lens, the lens of the Gen Z, and understand whether they will read the stories, they will like the stories, or the stories come across as Maha Itihas or Maha Scripture. And then came the illustrations as well. So we can share our illustrations with our authors together.
I would like to add one more point to her book. Her book was equally enjoyed by me and my mother. And my mother had such wonderful words for the book. You don't know this, Mona, but I thought this will be the best place to talk about it.
Wow.
The best part about her book is there is this story, then there is that key takeaway, which is explained so lucidly, which is so arresting. I mean, it sits in your mind immediately, and then you understand, oh, this is the core theme of the story. That's what is very, very attractive.
Thank you. A mother's blessings are always needed. Thank you for making my day.
Okay, these are the. Okay, I'll show the illustration there. These are the illustrations of two of a kind. This is a very favorite story of mine again. So this is Sun God. Of course, these are all, I don't claim to be a Van Gogh or somebody, but they do the deed that they are expected to do. So this is again, so this is the story about a Muni, if I may, just
yes,
couple
please,
of minutes.
Of course, please go on.
There is this Muni who's offering water to Ganga. Then in his outstretched palms, an eagle is flying with a mouse in its beak. So the mouse falls in its open palms, and then he converts the little mouse into a girl and then brings her up. And then when she attains marriageable age, he asks her, as every father would like, he wants the very best for her. So he thinks the mighty hills, Himalayas, because they guard us against the cold winds coming from the northern hemisphere. So he summons the mountains. A mountain says, I am now good. The wind they were greater than me, then wind, then cloud, and ultimately it happens that it comes down to a mouse, because a mouse is strong enough to bore holes into the mountains as well. Sun, wind, cloud, everything. There's a cycle. So eventually we always gravitate towards our own core. So then he converts the girl into the mouse, and then they get married. So that's the story. So this, I think, were the illustrations. So this is the cloud, this is the mountain and the wind, and the marriage ceremony of the mouse and the little rat. So this is the illustration. So there are story specific illustrations. These are, the children can identify, the young adults can identify. Whereas I think, Mona, you must also show your complex. She has done it with her daughter here.
Not the illustration, the stories are with my daughter. So this is an illustration of fishes. So the reason that I had the fish and one second, because I can do only one thing. So there's an illustration of the fishes over here, drawn by me, and then there is the flower, as in the lotus over here, and then there are the birds over here, and then there is a snake amongst the leaves. The reason I had the fish, the bird, the snake and the lotus, because they have a relevance, a significance in our Puranas. So if you see, Lakshmi and Saraswati sit on a lotus. Lakshmi on a pink lotus and Saraswati on a white lotus. The serpent, you look at Nageshwara, the story of Ulupi, the story of Nageshwara, half serpent, half human. Then there are birds, there are parrots. Parrots are very, very relevant in our Mahapuranas. for example, if I were to tell you that Sita went through all that, she endured all that pain and agony of separation in her life because she was cursed by a pair of parrots. And that is the reason out there, and that is why I have birds. So the snake, the parrot, and then comes the fishes. The fishes are very important as well. There are many stories like a Kokamuk Tirtha over here, where the story revolves around the life of a person who was a fish in their previous life. So that is why I made these 4 illustrations, because they also lend a very contemporary touch to the book and the stories, considering that these stories are from the one of the oldest literatures that we have. So it lends a very contemporary touch, and that is why we had this here. And coming back to you, Anupama, apart from the lovely sketches that you have, which are so relevant and add so much of volume to your book, the stories come from the oldest lipi, the Sharda lipi, and this origin is in Kashmir. So can you tell us about the history of and the the entomology of this particular book and where the stories are coming from?
If I told you that the very first storyteller is Sri Shankara, would you believe? Shankara Adinath, as we call him. As usual, he had gone on a mission to annihilate Rakshasa. He came back, and there was a celebration with the various ganas. So Parvati, once they retired to their private chambers, Parvati asked him, why don't you narrate to me the stories that have never been told? So he told the stories of 7 Vidyadharas and their magnificent adventures. But as luck would have it, there was a Gana called Pushpadanta who wanted an audience with Shiva immediately. So using his, but Nandi the bull who stood guard wouldn't let him go in. So using his magical powers, he made himself invisible, listened to their private conversations. So he was so enchanted by the stories, he repeated to his wife Jaya. Jaya then narrated the same stories to Parvati. Now Parvati was very, very unhappy because Shiva had promised that the stories would be original, that nobody had heard. Then they found out it was Pushpadanta who had broken the norm, so he was cursed. And another Gana, Malyavan, who interceded on his behalf, was also cursed to be born as a human. So they were born as Vararuchi. They were supposed to narrate these stories, and once these stories were popularized, they came back to heaven. So a lot of iterations happened. And once Malyavan rewrote these stories on, he called it the Brihat Katha, the great narrative. So they were written, again in those days also there was this scare of piracy. So he wrote it on his own, with his own blood on bark. And he took it to the king. The king found it very repugnant. So he sent him away. So when he saw that his greatest creation was not given the due respect, he consigned to flames each bark as he read each of the story. Only a lakh remained. When the king heard this, he came running and saved him. So Brihat Katha survived over years, over generations, went ahead as oral form till it became Katha Sarit Sagara. Somadeva had written for King of Kashmir, Ananta, because Kashmir even then was a land of strife. So to keep the lady, the queen, in a happier mode, he had written these stories and called them Katha Sarit Sagara, the ocean, the stream of ocean of stories. And from Brihat Katha, it was condensed into Katha Sarit Sagara, and that is the origin. Then from that I've kept the structure, I narrated the basic structure, the first story, and the last structure of the 7 Vidyadharas, that happens to be the last. But then there are about 39 stories in between. Those are the stories which cut across genres. There's humor, there's adventure, there's feminism, there is there's royalty, there is royal behavior. So I've tried to select those stories which will strike a resonance in the reader. Yeah.
Right. So you mean to say that, right from the beginning, even from those times where there is no documentation, so it was a smriti, the story was told, and then the story was told, it was a shruti, and then it was written because from what they remembered, so it was a smriti. So it is a confluence of both shruti and smriti, and then she's also reiterating the fact that from even in that time, to humor women and to keep women happy, men were always weaving stories.
Telling stories is their second nature, I guess. So in your book, Mona, the lesser gods are all, the way you imbue them with frailties, and how the Holy Trinity comes together to save the day for them, and how they all stay together and come good in times of strife or turmoil. Have you selected those stories on purpose because there is a greater takeaway here that, there is a pecking order, of course, but in times of difficulty, we all come together and that's how we win.
Yes, I mean that's a completely different aspect and a new one for me when you say that, because you say that as a reader. As a writer, when we both of us were writing these stories, we were very particular about certain things. One was that we are not going to have characters who are larger than life, holier than thou. So we are going to be talking about the gods and the demigods, but these are people who are not as if they are like 10 on 10 in terms of virtue. They are humanized, they've been humanized. They have the same rasas as we all have. So whether it is Veer, whether it is Bhai, whether it is Saundarya, they also have the same rasas in their character and their bearings, but they have special powers. They have special powers, and these special powers are the only point that separates them from ordinary mortals like us. And when you humanize them, you also make them very relatable, because when we were writing the book, we were particular about one thing, that this book should cater to anyone who wants to read it, or who can read, about 10 to 12-year-old, to anyone who can still read. So even somebody who's like 100 years old should be able to enjoy that book. So, when you are writing a book like that, you have to address the emotions and the understanding of all the different age verticals that you are addressing and trying to sell this book out to. So you have to tell it well, because how will a book sell when you tell it well? So how do you tell it well? By making it very relatable. So you tell them that, okay, Damayanti was somebody who was in love with Nala, but how the demigods, how the Lokpalas wanted to steal her from Nala. So they all were there in her Swayamvar in the garb of Nala.
Yeah.
So when the Yama is there, when the Vayu is there, when Indra is there, when Agni is there, when all these people are there, what does the poor Damayanti do? So she uses the power of logic and science. She knows that if a mortal, an ordinary mortal, what will they do when it's very hot outside? They are bound to sweat. They are bound to look fatigued. They are bound to tire. If they have a garland around their neck, it will be wilting. The flowers will wilt by the end of the day. So she uses all that, and then they will cast a shadow. So in the dog days of summer, close to 12 o'clock, your body is bound to cast a shadow. So this is how she identifies the real Nala and puts a garland around him. And the gods are left gaping. How did you find out? We were 5 of us. The real Nala plus 4 Lokpals.
That was also Nala and Damayanti find space here.
Okay, so that's a common ground we have here.
That was one of my most difficult stories to write,
yes,
especially the riddle part.
How do you make it relatable?
Yeah.
Those people also deigned to greed. They also deigned to vanity. They also deigned to envy, jealousy, and claiming something which was rightfully not theirs. So children and adults all alike find the characters relatable and they take to it. Questions, if any?
What were the challenges I asked?
See, for me, I can go first.
Yes.
See, I write predominantly humor and I write feminist pieces. I also blog a lot. So when you're writing there, you can indulge in not so formal language. You can, you have the luxury of going verbose. You have the luxury of talking across words. Whereas if you're writing to a young adult whose attention span is so limited, I mean, you're contending with Insta Reels, you're contending with YouTube content, you're already contending with so many things. So you have to be very terse, you have to be very controlled with your language, and you can't afford to let yourself go. So for me, that was the challenge, how to get your content out there, but in the minimal of words, maximum effect. So it was different from my writing style, but Mallar Chatterjee, when he gave me a 5-star review for the book, I said, okay, I've done my duty well.
Yeah, and he writes so beautifully, I said. When you're co-authoring the book with your 27-year-old daughter, so your entire study turns into a battleground as it is. So that was one big challenge. Secondly, there were many dichotomies. So when, as we spoken earlier, when Rishi Jamini goes to the Parbat to speak to 4 birds, now these birds have the name Pingashka, Subodha, Vibodha and Sumukha. But in certain scriptures, the word Pingashka is Pinaka. Somewhere it is something else. Somewhere it is something else. But because the Puranas have so much of symbolism and iconography in it, so when you go and find out the meaning of the word Pingashka, it means the yellow-eyed one. And birds generally have yellow eyes. So that's how I tried to understand that, okay, Pingashka was the right one, and I zeroed in on that name. So in terms of the names, in terms of the settings, in terms of names of cities, for people's names, etc., there are many dichotomies, and one has to do a whole lot of research to get it right. So I guess that was the biggest challenge I was up against. Thank you.
I want to know what was your inspiration and how did you research? Where did you research and how much time it took you to come to a point to realize that yes, now I can bring out a book or a story on something like this?
Pragya, it took me a long time to accede to his request, to the publisher's request to write a book on the Puranas, which was a very challenging task. So from Banaras Hindu University, I had requested some copies, and then there was Kanchi Kamkoti Peetham, the Ashtadasha Puranas, from which I did a whole lot of research, and after that I sent a couple of stories to my publisher, and when the first story Narottam and Vishnu went to him, he said this is exactly I want and don't change anything about it. And I was lucky with one thing, that I sent out 24 stories to him and all 24 stories were accepted. All of them. So I never had to send him something which was like a surplus. But yes, it took me some time because I was not confident about how to go about it. It was a completely new genre. I had done mythology, I had done lots of history, but not mythology in terms of Puranas, which is a completely different ballgame.
At a personal level, what motivates you to write? Because
For me?
yeah, for both of you in that sense.
Writing was, this I've said a number of times to the ad nauseum again, I was going through a very difficult time in 2013. I'm not even trained in the nuances. I am a techie by education, profession wise also I was a techie, but in a very difficult time of life, writing was what kept me afloat. Writing made sense to me then. Writing just gave me a parallel identity. I could be myself there without somebody's wife, somebody's mother, where I could let loose. So that saved me, so it became my calling card. Otherwise I didn't get up with a thought one day and say, chalo aaj likhte hain, and bus is the blockbuster. It just happened very organically. Thank you for the question.
A very timely royalty check keeps us motivated. right? And apart from that, I feel writing also helps you process your emotions very well. When you write, writing is very cathartic. There are many things that you don't understand about the dilemmas of life. When you start writing them, from somewhere the answers emerge as well. Because when you are writing about a problem, you are also processing the solution in your head. And sometimes it is very close to life as well. Thank you.